time directors, or that's more of like
no, but so we don't, but we have I mean, we have a program called pre-development, and it's to write, basically write a pitch or like the first draft of a script or something. But you do need to get a producer to help you if you're not, or I mean, you could be a producer-writer combo and do it yourself, but you do need to get into that program. You don't need any money from a broadcaster, but you need at least for them to write you a letter of interest. It has to be a CRTC licensed broadcaster, and they need to, like, they don't actually have to write it from scratch. We have a form called the letter of interest form, believe it or not. And so, and each broadcaster, and I think it's broadcasters and provincial agencies that can write this letter, but the catch is they're only allowed to write 2 each per year. So you have to get to them first. But, you know, but I mean, potentially, you know, like, because the CRTC licensed broadcaster, there's a lot of small digital channels. So if you can't get it from, let's say, CBC, for example, you could probably maybe get it from a smaller digital channel, as long as they're CRTC licensed. And people ask us, do we have a list of CRTC licensed broadcasters? We don't, but I mean, broadcasters will know if they're CRTC licensed or not, because they would have had to go through that process. You just ask them. And then as far as like for newer, I mean, so I'll touch on our envelope funds, which is the funds that the bulk of our funds are called envelope funds in development and production, and they are pretty much controlled by the broadcaster. So it is good to learn how to pitch to a broadcaster, because a lot of the funds for our television series, you need to have a broadcaster before you can even come to us. And then they get a designated portion of CMF to give out throughout the fiscal year. So, you know, it's all based on historical access to the fund. They get points for funding regional producers, and then they get points based on the ratings of the show, and then also whether or not it premiered on like OTT, they call it, which is basically like Gem or Crave versus traditional broadcast. And the broadcasters, so like, you know, CBC, for example, would have about $60 million to hand out throughout the year, whereas like Knowledge Network, which is a small BC channel, maybe has 500,000 or something, you know. But I actually really don't remember how much they do have, but the envelopes are all listed on our website, so you can sort of see which broadcasters have one. But even for the broadcasters that don't have an envelope because they're too small, there's what we call the common envelope, which is for or I think they call it the alternative access envelope. And basically, so if you have a tiny digital channel, but it is CRTC licensed, they can still license a project, and then they can ask for money from this alternative access envelope, which would then enable them to start growing their own envelope. And that enables them to be able to sort of try to get playing with the bigger channels. But and then, we also have a sort of for first timer program in the experimental stream, but it's called the Conceptualization Fund, and it's actually still open, so I'll talk to people about that. It's not for linear content, though. It's for video games, software, apps, that kind of thing. And that's first come, first serve. Most of our experimental funds for the video game, software, apps type of crowd is jury-based, but this one is you can get up to $15,000 to do some basic R&D on your project before you're ready to actually put in a bigger application for prototyping or production, which is, you know, the juried ones. So that's you know, if somebody's, it's not for web series, unfortunately, but it's for, you know, if somebody has an idea for a game or cultural soft, like it has to be for the cultural sector. So you know, unfortunately, we can't accept applications to do like software for engineering firms or something like that, you know, so it has to be arts and entertainment based. But yeah, that's actually, and it actually has a rule on that fund that 40% of that fund must be spent on projects that are not in Toronto or Montreal by more than 150 kilometers, and that anybody who's ever successfully received experimental funding before is not allowed to apply to that program. It's for basically newbies. So there isn't something that's equivalent on the TV side other than pre-dev, where you need that letter of interest. And then of course there's development envelope when the broadcaster is ready to pay a producer and writer to write a script and stuff like that. But I mean, that gets spent on, you know, from new producers all the way up to very experienced producers. So
amazing.
So we're just going to start
It's 2 o'clock. Okay.
in about 1 minute. So I'll just wait for the instructions. I just want to do a quick intro and then start off with the presentation.
Yeah, no problem. So I hope it doesn't look clunky that I'm sliding my PowerPoint back and forth to go to the other one, just because I didn't know you wanted to talk about the experimental stuff, but that's great because I have one all prepared.
Yeah, I think experimental is always a good option. So we can touch upon that if we get enough time. So
okay,
wonderful. So good morning, everybody, and good afternoon in the East Coast. This is Mannu Sandhu from Vancouver, BC. And today we have Shyam Valera, who is the Board of Director with the Vancouver International South Asian Film Festival, and also Shelley Coultish, who is the Deputy Director at Canada Media Fund.
Oh, Manu, I think you're muted.
Yeah, your mic just went to mute.
Okay. So VISAFF provides a platform to share and promote South Asian stories, culture, and perspectives that go unprecedented and in the mainstream cinema, and works to foster a connection between directors, actors, producers, community organizations, corporate brands, and South Asian cinephiles. With the pandemic this year, we were not able to do a physical event, as you can see. But what we did was we did a coalition of 7 different film festivals, which is also happening this week, along with us doing separate events. So VISAFF is the largest South Asian film festival created in response to COVID-19 pandemic in support of the South Asian filmmakers. And the festival is inclusive to all South Asian voices around the world. The 7 festivals that are joined with them, and the Sphere, that is a Seattle-based South Asian Film Festival, pretty much curated this entire program and let us be part of it. So it's the Sphere South Asian Film Festival, Chicago South Asian Film Festival, DC South Asian Film Festival, Mosaic International Film Festival, Nepal American International Film Festival, and South Asian Film Festival, Montreal, and of course our very own Vancouver International South Asian Film Festival. So today in this discussion, we will learn how to make your application for funding stand out in the market where you can get tons of applications. We will also take in-depth look of the Canada Media Fund Diverse Language Program, which provides funding to productions in language and the English, not other than the English language, French and Aboriginal languages. And also we might be able to share some of the experimental programs that they have as well. So I will pass it on to Shyam now to introduce our speaker.
Hello. Shelley Coultish, we are very excited to have you here. She holds the position of Deputy Director at the CMF as CMF Program Administrator based out of Telfilm's Toronto office. The CMF is a non-for-profit corporation that delivers approximately 350 million, I'll say that again, 350 million in funding annually to support Canada's television and digital media industries through 2 streams of funding. So there's the convergent stream, which the CMF supports the creation of television and digital media content for consumption by Canadians anytime, anywhere. And then there's the experimental stream, where CMF encourages the development of innovative interactive digital media and software applications. The CMF also administers several international incentives, which partner with organizations in other countries to co-develop and co-produce television and digital media content. So thank you so much, Shelley. I know you are a very, very big deal. So we really, really appreciate being here.
All right, great. Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I hope everybody's enjoying their long weekend. So I have 2 different presentations. One is more experimental focused and one is more television and web series focused. So I'll start with the television one and we can flip to the experimental slides if we need to. So let me just find the share my screen button. Okay. Here we go. So, oh, sorry about my Schitt's Creek desktop. Anyway, okay. So, So as Shyam mentioned, I work at Telefilm Canada, which is actually a different organization entirely from the Canada Media Fund. But Telefilm has their own programs for feature film and festivals and various other things. But they also administer all of Canada Media Fund's programs. So Canada Media Fund, they have their own staff who write all the do all the policy and come up with the programs and a variety of other functions. But the actual program administration team is out of Telefilm. So just to understand like why you have to go to 2 different websites when you're applying to our funds. So CMF's goals are to foster and develop the industry, finance projects, and promote Canadian talent throughout the world and within Canada. Where we get our funding from is a portion of it comes from Canadian Heritage, about half, and the rest of it comes from a levy that the CRTC puts on various broadcaster distribution units. So as the cable revenues have been going down because people cut their cable, the heritage portion has been going up. But we're still maintaining a yearly budget of approximately $350 million, as Shyam mentioned. And under that, you'll see there's many different programs. We have an Indigenous stream, we have national partnerships. So we have various partnerships with other funds within Canada. For example, last year we had a web series fund where we partnered with IPF for co-development, and a Shaw Rocket Fund co-production web series fund. We have our international incentives, which I'll talk about when I get to that slide. Our diverse language program for projects that are not in English, French, or an Indigenous language. Export programs, including versioning. There's a partnership with WildBrain for development, and then we have our experimental and our convergent funds. And under those, there's many different programs. As you can see, there's various incentives. English Regional Bonus might be one that interests you guys, and I will touch on them all as I go through this presentation. So in the convergent stream, so the CMF does not fund everything. We don't fund the news, sports, magazine, talk shows, things like that, but we do fund drama, which includes comedy. It just means scripted, really. Documentary, variety and performing arts, and children's and youth. And then there's a non-exhaustive list of the things that we don't fund, such as how-to programming, curriculum-based educational programs, although children's educational sort of programs would be fine, reporting and current events, game shows, current affairs, reality shows, lifestyle productions, magazine shows, music videos. So, so when you're wanting to do a show with CMF, it has to be out of one of the 4 eligible genres. And most of the funding for our convergent stream that supports television is administered by broadcasters around Canada. So you have to take your show and pitch it to a CRTC licensed broadcaster, and it can be anything from as big as like CBC or Bell Media, which owns CTV and a variety of channels, or Chorus, which also owns Global and a variety of other specialty channels. Or you could go to like a very small digital channel as long as they're CRTC licensed. Not all, what we call it is the envelope system. So every broadcaster in Canada that has been sort of participating in CMF funding for years will have what's called their own envelope, and they'll have a designated amount to give out to development of scripts or documentaries, and also the production funding is called the performance envelope, and that's when you're ready to actually shoot the show, and they'll fund that out of their envelope plus a license fee that they pay themselves. However, we do have funds where you don't need a broadcaster involved, and I will get into that. I also want to mention that we have programs that are for more of earlier stages, like pre-development. Pre-development is a program where you still need a letter from a CRTC licensed broadcaster saying that they are basically interested in seeing your pitch, and then you can I can't remember the exact amount, I think it's something upwards of $30,000 to develop pitch materials. In a non-pandemic world, you can also put costs to travel to Toronto or Montreal to meet with broadcasters. And there's like a regional allocation that is set aside for regional producers, I believe, because they tend to have more costs involved in pitching a broadcaster because they have to travel, unlike producers in Toronto or Montreal. And then we also have a program called Early Stage Development, which is all the programs I'm talking about. Some of them are still open, but there are some that have closed for the year that will be reopening next year. And early stage development is if you're an experienced writer and you have 10 hours or more credits in writing on Canadian television shows, plus a producer credit, you can apply for, I think it's anywhere between $30,000 and $40,000. I don't know the numbers. I haven't. I don't manage that fund, but in any case, that one is specifically for writers, and you don't. The writers apply directly to it. You don't need a producer to help you with that one, unlike the pre-dev one. So if you don't have the credits, you would go through pre-dev because you'd need a producer to help you get that letter from a broadcaster. But if you do have the credits, you can go directly to the Early Stage Development Fund, and that one is selective with a jury. So whereas pre-dev is basically until it runs out, first come, first serve. So how do we normally see a television show in Canada get financed? So first, there's usually a license fee. Depending on our programs, the license, like, this is an average, but our programs actually require to have a license fee with, you know, some genres, like it's different by genre, and so some genres like children's shows, they need to put, the broadcaster must put in at least 25% cash in order to designate CMF, whereas you have all the way up to dramas, some of them need 45% from the broadcaster, and then they can put in CMF money as well. So you'll usually see license fees from the broadcaster, CMF, maybe other public funding, maybe private funds, like there's Shaw Rocket Fund for kids shows, Rogers Documentary Fund, Rogers Cable Network Fund, and various other private funding. You might see some foreign financing in the financial structure. Perhaps you've already got a foreign broadcaster giving you a license fee. You'll see a distribution advance sometimes. And then, of course, usually always you'll see tax credits. So there's a federal tax credit administered by CAVCO, and then the provincial tax credit in each province. So not every province has a tax credit, but BC does. And if anybody's from anywhere else, I think the only provinces that don't, I don't want to guess, so I won't anyway, but check your provincial government website to see if you can find if you have tax credits in your province. So the diverse language program, I wanted to talk about that one first. Eligible applicants, and this is actually not just for diverse language, this is actually for every single program that we have. An eligible applicant to the CMF is a company that is for profit, so we don't accept nonprofits, sole proprietorships, general partnerships. You must be incorporated to apply, but you actually, if you're doing a selective fund, you don't need to be incorporated to apply, but if we pick your project, you will need to incorporate, so you should budget for the incorporation fees. So we allow you to check a box on the application that says on behalf of a company to be incorporated, because we don't want you to pay that kind of money if your project doesn't get selected. So, and it has to be considered Canadian owned and controlled as determined by, this is very boring, but as determined by sections 26 to 28 of the Investment Canada Act, and have its head office in Canada, or alternatively, a Canadian broadcaster that is CRTC licensed can apply directly for in-house projects. That, I think there's a limit on that though, because we want to give the bulk of our money out to independent projects. And the one thing to keep in mind about you know, all these words Canadian, 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 is that permanent residents of Canada also count as Canadian. There is a period where if you're a permanent resident of Canada and you have been told by the Canadian government you can apply for citizenship, if you wait too long, suddenly your company is not considered Canadian owned and controlled by this act. But if you're worried that you might not qualify, you should call us and discuss it, and we can usually tell you if you qualify or not. So in the Diverse Language Fund, so as I mentioned before, it's a fund for programs that are not in English, French, or an Indigenous language. Every project that we have in all of our television convergent funds has to be aired on 2 platforms. So you have to, you can have traditional broadcast, you could have OTT, which is like a word that we use for things like gem or crave or any kind of you know, online digital channel, or you can use the app on your Apple TV or whatever. And then traditional broadcasts can count as well. The broadcaster could stream it on their website, but it has to be able to be seen in one of two ways. So usually people will have traditional broadcast plus streaming, either through an app or a website or whatever. You can also have it put on a VOD service. So, you know, everybody's cable package, if you still have a cable package, usually has like a button to open your video on demand. That also can count. And then you can also, if you want to, include a digital media project that kind of it's part of your budget that goes with your project. And usually those digital media projects are very small and they're just like promotional for the television show. But I mean, you certainly could do something that was bigger than just promotional. If you had like a children's animated series, you could make a little bit like little web video game or something to go with it. But it's like the bulk of them do tend to be promotional. And then in this diverse language fund, in the last, I guess, yeah, like they have about 5 years worth of stats. Sorry, I need to just drink some water. Give me a second. We've been seeing programs in Spanish, Italian, Mandarin seem to get the most. Then we have Russian, Arabic, Cantonese, Farsi, Punjabi, Urdu, and Hindu, Ukrainian, Tagalog. We have it, and I think that's all we've seen so far, but obviously we're open to any language that's not one of the three on top here. It's a selective program, so that means there's a scoring grid, and you get scored on various factors, and if you're selected, then we will give you funding. The deadline has passed, unfortunately, already for this year, but it will be back next year. It's usually in mid-September. It could change, but the CMF doesn't release their deadlines for the coming, like our fiscal year runs every year from April to March, and they always announce their new guidelines and deadlines in the end of March. They're usually fairly similar to what last year's date was, so that's probably when it would be. The program budget is $3.5 million. Of course, you have to have the show has to be in one of our eligible genres. And then the maximum you can get is 49% of your total budget, or $200,000, whichever is less. The evaluation grid scores the market interest of the show, the team, production and creative, the creative elements of the script, the budget, the program objectives. Yeah, I already talked about the multi-platform requirement. And this program has only a 10% license fee required from the broadcaster, so you do need to have that, but it's not as high as in performance envelope, where it could be between 25 and 45%. This is supposed to give the broadcasters an incentive to license your show, because they can pay less for it, but still get CMF money put into it, which does not come out of their envelope. It's a special pot of money just for this fund. And then you also must put your provincial and federal tax credits in the financial structure at 90% each. So then the next program I want to talk about is the Digital Linear Series program. This is, it's been called the Web Series program for the last 3 years, but they changed the name to Digital Linear Series now, because it technically doesn't have to be on the web. It could be on like a GEM or a Crave kind of service as well. So, this is just the same thing I talked about. It's the eligible applicants again, so I'll blow past that. So the Digital Linear Series Fund, it's not for development, it's for production only. We can give you 60% of your budget, or $250,000, whichever is less. It must be a second season or later. This is for series that have had success in their first season. If you have a first season web series, then I advise you to go to IPF or Bell Fund, because they do first season. It has to be in either drama, comedy, children's and youth, or documentary. There's no variety in performing arts in the Web Series Fund, and a series is defined as at least 3 related episodes of linear video content, at least 2 minutes in duration per episode. The first season of the series has to have aired online before you apply. So, and we're going to ask you, I'm just going to quickly shuffle the guidelines over here. So We ask you for things like your audience metrics, whether you have third-party support, so from a distributor, another funding agency, market channel partner, crowdfunding, broadcaster. Did you get critical acclaim? Did you win anything in festivals, or did you get any good critical print and online publication praise? Did you win any awards? And that's the, so we look at that for the market interest score. Then we also score the team, and then we also score the creative elements, which is obviously like the script and various other factors. So back to this. It is a selective curated fund, and it's not a grant, it's a recoupable investment. So we do take a cut of the sales of your project. So the international jury will score it, and whoever's successful then would have to, for the next, so everything that we put an investment into, you have to report to us twice a year for 7 years on your sales, and we get our percentage of that. You can do international co-productions in this, but there is no treaty like there is for film and television. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with international treaty co-productions, but on the television side of thing, there's various countries, I think there's like 40 at the moment, where the government has negotiated a treaty with working with another country, and you have to get your treaty certified at Telefilm's Montreal office, and then if you do that, then you'll be eligible to apply to Canadian funds. And that works for film and TV, but for digital media, there's no formal treaty yet. So we and Bell Fund and IPF and a few other funds came up with a set of rules where you can structure it as a co-production for digital media, but you have to follow certain guidelines. I'm not going to get into it right now because it's really super complicated, but if anybody's interested in talking about that, they can certainly contact me and I can walk them through it. We also have a bunch of international incentives. Most of these, there's a few of them that are still coming, but most of these are closed for the year. But this is just a sampling of some of the places we've worked with, but the CMF is always looking for other ones. Most of them are co-development. There's a few that do production, and the bulk of them are for digital media, so web series, games, software, VR and AR experiences. There are a few of them, though, that are for television script development. Like, I think the only ones on this list are Ireland and South Africa. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that those exist. And now I'm just going to shuffle over my experimental slides just to talk about the experimental funds briefly. I can blow past some of these. So we also have, so the Convergent Stream, as I said, is mainly for television shows. Digital Linear Series Fund that I just talked about does actually fall under experimental, and that's just because you don't need to have a broadcaster to get into it, whereas all the Convergent Fund programs, you generally need a broadcaster to get access, with the exception of the Writers Fund, the early stage development. But then we have our experimental programs, and so other than the digital media, the Digital Linear Series Fund, we have the ones that fund rich interactive content, games, and software. They have to be, oops, I'm just going to blow past these ones here because they have to be significantly interactive or highly immersive, and they have to be connected to the cultural sector. So for example, if you're going to submit a software application, it can't be for like, medical or engineering or, the health and wellness sector. It has to be arts and entertainment related. So that's where people often are deemed ineligible. So if you're not sure if your project fits into the cultural sector, please give us a call. We're super friendly. We do what we call pre-application consultations all the time. And just, make sure your project's eligible, because it is a very long application to write and it's selected by a jury. It takes about 8 to 10 weeks to get a decision. So you don't want to go to all that trouble and just get a letter saying you're not eligible, 8-10 weeks later. So please call us and talk about your project. If it's a game, it automatically qualifies because that falls under arts and entertainment. But there are, probably some apps and software that fall in a gray zone, and you might want to discuss that with us before you put together an application. So that's the same rules, eligible applicants, as we've already discussed. And then there's program phases. So we have one that's for brand new producers to this fund. You actually could be experienced, but you can't ever have received money in the experimental other phases before to apply to this conceptualization program. You don't need a broadcaster or anything to apply to this fund. The only thing that you do need is at least 1 year's experience in the television and film industry or the digital media industry. And that's basically just to filter out people that don't work in this business, because there's a limited amount of money. And this is the only one of these ones that is first come, first serve. You can ask for up to $15,000 to do some R&D on your project, you know, just to kind of get you to a point where you're ready to do the bigger funds. So the next ones are prototyping, which is to build your prototype. You can get all of these funds, you can get up to 75% of your budget or the maximum cap, whatever is less. So maximum cap on this is 15 grand. This is $250,000. These ones are 1.5 million. And I'll touch on that at the end, but prototyping is to build your prototype. It is selective. Again, it's got about a 20 to 30% success rate. It's pretty competitive. And then when you get to the production and marketing phase, which are bundled together, you have to choose a path. Are you an innovation project or are you a commercial project? And the difference is here, we're not so worried about return on investment. We're worried more about, we're really just looking at the idea. Is this an innovative idea, either through content or technology? It doesn't have to be both. And then commercial, we're really just more focused on how fast are we going to get our investment back? And like, what's your revenue model? How are you going to make as much money as you can, basically? We also look at the idea, of course, but that's more of the focus of that program. And then the last thing is there is an accelerator partnership program. You can get $30,000 to work with an incubator or accelerator, but you have to have been chosen for one of these two programs in production in order to get into this. And this one is not selective, it's first come, first serve. So if you've got production funding, you can ask for this money as soon as, you know, you're contracted in this phase. So, and then, oh, this is just, yeah, so sorry, some of these are the same. So here's my slide, and I had this in both. How to maximize your chances if you want to apply to a selective fund with a CMF. So the first thing is sign up for Dialogue. Dialogue is our application portal, and you get to it through the Telefilm Canada website. So I know that's kind of odd, but you can't get to it off. The CMF website has all the guidelines and deadlines, but the telefilm.ca website has the login button. You click on it and you say create a new Dialogue account, and that's how you apply to CMF programs. Don't try and do it on the day of the deadline. Like, sign up for it in advance. I mean, it doesn't take that long, but still, if something goes wrong and you need IT support, don't do it the day of a deadline, because that's just going to stress you out. So also, as I mentioned, use our pre-application consultation service. So that there actually is, if you sign up for Dialogue, you can actually click submit a pre-application, and like you can submit like a project summary or something and say, I'd like to discuss eligibility of this project. And then that goes into our portal and we assign it to people to answer you. But you can also just call us or email us, and I'll put up those emails at the end. And so, yeah, if you have eligibility concerns for any reason, please call us and talk to us about it before you apply. Or if you just want advice on how to put together a good application, we can help you with that as well. Only submit a project when it's ready and you have time to create a competitive application. So if you go, oh, wow, I see that tomorrow is the prototyping deadline. I think I'm going to whip something together over, you know, in the next 2 hours. Don't do that, because you're not going to be competitive enough to compete against the people that spent like a couple months putting their proposal together. So unless you had something already prepared for like another funding agency, I would not advise to do that. I'd take your time with it and apply to the next deadline if you don't have enough time for the upcoming one. And then, I mean, I know this sounds obvious, but read the guidelines for the program and that you're going to apply to, and take note of all of these score. Like if it's selective, there's the scoring grid is published. It tells you exactly what the juries are looking at. Make sure you look at that, and there's little bullet points under each category. Those are very important, because that's exactly what the jury is looking for. So you need to explain each bullet point to make sure that you get the maximum amount of points. In addition to reading the most current guidelines, it's often helpful to open the reference documents. So when you go on the website and you find your program and you find the guidelines, there's always a button beside it that says View Reference Documents. Download Appendix B. And this was more specific to experimental, but like basically look at the policies that might affect you. There's various policies on how much you can put in for producer fees and overhead into your budget. There's various insurance policies that you need to read to make sure you budget properly for them. There's the accounting and reporting requirements, you know, so you'll know whether you need to budget for an audit or a review engagement report. In the smaller funds, you don't need to do that. You can just give us a final cost report signed by you. But the bigger amounts you ask for, the more like kind of third-party accounting stuff you'll need to do. So make sure you look at that so that you know what to budget for. And then again, this might also seem like super obvious, but it's not to some people, so I like to mention it, is go to the program you want to apply to. There's always below the guidelines, there's the application documents. Download the required documents checklist and the budget template. Do what it says on the required documents checklist exactly, because if you try and just put in, you know, don't freestyle your application. Don't just do it the way you want to do it. Do it the way we say, because they need to be uniform in order for the jurors to be able to compare them to each other. And then, you know, if there are page limits, not all funds have page limits, but if there are page limits, please try to respect that. And support materials you can submit, which generally are like demo videos, letters of interest, artwork, whatever. And then finally, if you do not get selected, but even if you do, it might be useful for you to read it. If you don't get selected though, please, you can log in immediately when you get notified, and you can read the analysis notes from the jurors and the analysts. You can see what they scored you. You can ask for a follow-up call, and we can talk to you about how you might do a stronger application next time, because you are allowed to apply again. That's it there. Oh, I'm going to go back to the, one second, how do I get out of this thing? I'm going to go back to the original one here. So I had those same slides there. So we also wanted to just point out that we have a, CMF has a trends blog, and it has all kinds of really interesting articles that might like help you, you know, just gain knowledge to like plan your projects or whatever. So I recommend checking that out. They also have a podcast, which I guess is accessed here. There's also, if you're interested, they have a website. This is just sort of for your interest, but if you want to see projects, you know, Canadian projects that have been done in the past, a lot of them that the CMF have funded, this is sort of the Nostalgia Encore Plus YouTube channel. So if you're interested in watching old episodes of The Littlest Hobo or something, or Beachcombers, you can always go here. And then that is it. Okay, so that took, yeah, a little longer than I thought, but there we go. And this is my name and my phone number, and this is Jill Sampson. If you're interested in Diverse Language Fund or web series, or rather digital linear series fund, call Jill or email Jill. If you're interested in experimental funding or anything else, give me a shout. Also, if you just have general questions like how do I sign up for dialogue, or where do I find the guidelines, or what are the deadlines, where do you find that on the website? This is our general coordination phone number and email. So we have a coordination team. They're our frontline workers, and they're there for answering general questions and helping you if you're having trouble with dialogue or whatnot. So that is it for the PowerPoint. And I did want to just open the website for you. Oh, sorry, I'm on Twitter. 1 second, I'm just going to open the website because I did want to point out where you find certain things on the website. So programs and deadlines. So all of our programs, you just click the plus button here, and you just go here, and you just click on whichever one you want. So, you know, let's say you wanted to look at the performance envelope program. You would just click here, and then you would scroll down to the guidelines, and then here's where the reference documents are that I mentioned. Appendix A and B are pretty important to look at. And then you have all the application documents. So you'll have your required documents checklist, and there's even a data entry guide that tells you exactly how to apply in dialogue. And there's various other supplemental documents that you'll need. And then also if you want to see like the application deadlines, it's the same place, application deadlines, and they're just all here. So those are the most two important things to find. And that's kind of it for my presentation. So I guess we can do the Q&A now, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Welcome to all the participants that are on this panel. Like we said, it's a very specific panel to people that are, you know, going into their second phase of funding. And thank you for all the information. I can actually personally vouch how, you know, easy it is to go into the dialogue program, because we apply for funding from telefilms as well. So Canada Media Fund and Canada Media Producers Associations is There are two of our sponsors today. So thank you for, sponsoring this platform. I know this would have been a lot more fun in person because we've done these with you guys before, but this is what it is. Maybe we can do it next year.
Well, it's definitely too, because then I get to go out to Vancouver, and I love Vancouver. So.
Well, we'll love to have you here soon. For me, the two questions would be, like you said, you do give assistance in helping with the application because, creative people can have all the kits ready and everything, but then it comes down to specifically what they should write in there. Is Canada Media Fund also helps with setting up that as well, or just mostly just guidance?
So basically what happens is if you call our coordination team, if either our coordinators or analysts or Jill or myself or any of our other managers, we can help you navigate dialogue. We can help you go through the required documents checklist and understand what we're asking for. Okay. The one thing we cannot, and we can talk about your project and whether it's eligible and what fund would be the most appropriate one for it. What stage are you at? Which fund should you apply for? All of those things. The one thing we can't do is give you any sort of indication if the jury might pick your project, because we don't know. It's all, it depends what comes in to that round of funding, and it depends on, what the strongest projects are. So we can't give you any indication with the selective funds of whether you might get picked, because we just, we can't possibly predict that. But we certainly can tell you in terms of the first come first serve or the non-selective funds, whether you're eligible, period. So.
Okay, that's helpful. And also, is there a specific budget your first season has to be for you to qualify for the second? Like you said, you have to have 3 seasons or 3 episodes. Does it have to be a certain budget?
There doesn't have to be a certain budget limit. Like we get everything. So I guess we're talking about the Digital Linear Series Fund. There doesn't have to be a certain budget. We do evaluate your budget though. So like you could have, we get anywhere from low budget to high budget to everything in between. But what we do when we evaluate your budget is we're reading your script and then we're looking at your team and we're going to evaluate, is this budget appropriate for this type of project, So we also watch the first season. So, if it's low budget and that actually works for it, then that could be fine. But if you have a sci-fi web series and there's tons of special effects and you haven't budgeted enough, that might get noted, that the budget is not high enough to pay for this, or whatever. So basically.
Great. Now, before I pass it on to Shyam, I just have one audience question. The VISAFF, he's asking guidelines for international doc series funding and already financed documentary distribution.
So there's no program that's specifically for international documentary series. You can either go to a broadcaster and pitch your documentary, and they can give you funding for it through the envelope system. And we don't fund finished projects. Anything that has actually already aired is not eligible. So we don't give funding to projects that are basically done. The only ones we do is if you did get performance envelope, or any other of our selective funds, and you produced a television show with CMF funding, there is a fund for versioning into other languages that you could come to later. So for example, if you did an English show and you wanted to version it into any other language, usually it's French just because we're in Canada, but it could be any other language. You could go to the versioning fund for that later once the show is complete in the original language. Or if you came to the diverse language fund and you were selected and you did a show in, let's say, Farsi, you could come to the versioning fund later to get money to dub it into English. So so that's the only one that really deals with finished projects, but most of our funds are for pre-production, you haven't shot some of it. You can have shot some of it, but especially in documentary too, sometimes you've been shooting for a while before you get a broadcaster on board. But I hope that answers the question.
Awesome, thank you. So I'll pass it on to Shyam for a few questions, and then we have about 15 minutes if we have any other audience questions. I think Roger's gonna unmute you in just a second. There. Yeah, on our panel right now, we have 3 of our other board of directors as well here today. So they're watching us, Shelley.
I know, I see a bunch of people. Hello.
There you go.
So there's Shyam.
All right. Thank you so much for that. That was very, very enlightening. One thing we were talking about before we got started, which I loved your answer to, so I'll ask a very similar question. You mentioned IPF and Bell Fund for like season 1 web series, someone who's starting off and trying to make a kind of like a calling card. What about for those people, like the first time writers, directors, like what is their journey so that they can get CMF funding?
So generally, like in terms of first-time writers, I think really it's important to partner with an experienced producer, somebody that can help you get, you know, put a good application together. Because oftentimes the writers are not necessarily always experienced at doing funding applications and reading guidelines and doing the budget and stuff like that. I mean, there are quite a few producer writer dual like combo people, but so to speak. But you know, if you're a writer and you have no connections to pitch your script to a broadcaster, I really think you should start working with a producer who does have those connections. And if it's not for broadcast, if it's for the Digital Linear Series Fund, I mean, you can do it yourself, but if your forte is not writing funding applications, you may want to partner with somebody who has that business experience.
Amazing. I had more questions, but honestly, they were answered in the fund.
Yeah, it's a lot of information to throw at people all at once. That's why I give my contact information, because you know, and I hope everybody got a chance to screenshot or copy that down. If not, I'll put it back up on the screen, but or I'll type it in the chat window. But yeah, I mean, we're open to taking phone calls all the time, and emails, and you know, we can also be, we don't do business on LinkedIn, but if you didn't get my email address, you can always find me on LinkedIn and I can give it to you. And
amazing. I know you're more part of the interactive section at CMF, but in terms of like web series and kind of these new experimental things, how important is the business model there? And like, have you seen some good business models?
Generally, so for web series, we do, or I keep calling it the web series fund because I can't change. It's called the Digital Linear Series Fund now, but anyways, it's the same thing. We don't ask you to write a business model or a revenue model for that one. We just want to know about the market interest from your previous season and for this season. You know, so like whether you have a distributor, did you win awards in the past, that sort of thing. What festivals were you in, blah, blah, blah. But for the experimental funds for the software, mobile apps, VR, AR, XR experiences, and video games, you do need to write a revenue model. It's more important at the production stage. We still ask you, though, to do a small one during prototyping. You don't need to do it at all for conceptualization. We just need to know what the idea is. But for the ones that are competitive and selective, you do need to talk about how are you going to monetize it? Is this game like a free game, but there's in-app purchases? Is it subscription-based? Do you just buy it outright? How much money do you predict that you could make with this revenue model? You know, do you have previous games in the past or VR projects or whatever it is that you're doing in the past that you can say, like, I think that this will, you know, have similar sales to, you know, this other one we did, or just compare yourself to other things that are in the market that maybe you aren't involved in. But yeah, definitely for the experimental fund, that is very important. But for the Digital Linear Series Fund, it's more about the success of the previous season and then your market interest on the current season.
Amazing.
And when we say second seasons or later, like you may have several seasons in the can already, and you're coming in for like the 5th season, for example.
So we just have one audience question. She is from Toronto, Rashmi Lamba. She is a producer based out of Toronto. She has a track record with Canada Media Fund and Telefilms. So she's asking, how much of a priority would you give to an application that is already kind of with the experienced producer?
So, so for the selective funds, because for the performance envelope ones, obviously you just need to have access to pitch a broadcaster your idea, and then they decide. But for the selective funds, it definitely helps your team score. So you do get scored on your team for all of these funds. If you have more experience, you're going to do better in that section. And that's not to say that new producers won't get picked, because if it's only a part of the mark. So if you have a really great script or awesome idea, you could still get picked even if you're like newer to the industry. But if you're experienced, it's definitely going to help you to show, you know, what you've done in the past, you know, what programs you've produced before, or, you know, what games you've developed before, or whatever fund you happen to be applying to. It definitely helps your team scores. So yeah, there is a weight on that.
Okay, yeah, I know she's working on a project at the moment from Toronto, so could be somebody that you'll be hearing from.
Okay.
Shyam's working on a project himself for the second season. Do you have any questions specifically, or any of the other audience members? Oh, Raj, you have to unmute him. Power of Zoom.
Oh man. Yeah, so we had a web series, Welcome to Surrey, that had over 1 million views and won a bunch of awards at festivals and stuff, which we're super proud of. And we were looking at doing the second season through CMF. And then the business model came through, like, as I know part of their requirement is that CMF will fund 60% and then someone else will fund 40% of it. But when we were talking to some funders, they were like, there's no revenue stream for web series unless it's someone like Crave.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
barrier.
We have heard anecdotal evidence that these series are not making a ton of money, but I mean, you know, I haven't really examined, like, people who get investments from us are required to report on that project twice a year for the first 4 years, and then once a year for the last 3 years, and then we drop out after year 7, whether we made our money back or not. So, you know, I haven't heard that any of our digital linear series have fully recouped. I mean, we invest in a lot of things, and a lot of it is really more about, you know, growing the industry and fostering talent and stuff. The CMF does want to try and make some money, because, you know, then they can put it back into their budget for the next year and fund more projects. But the only things I know that have fully recouped are some of the big budget dramas that we fund. Children's animation does really well because you can version it into every language and sell it all over the world. And then some of the video games we funded in the experimental stream have done so well that we've never heard from that producer again because they don't need our money anymore. But yeah, generally to fund a web series, so we only go up to 60% or 250,000, whichever is less. So you have to find that other 40%. So various ways of finding that is provincial funding agencies, provincial tax credits. Sometimes I think if you can get it on a certain platform, you qualify for federal tax credits as well. You know, if you have money to invest, producer investment also works. And then you can also, the shareholders of the company can defer some of their fees if they want to. That's kind of the general ways, and then other funding agencies too. I mean, if you know, maybe you would qualify for 2 different funding agencies, but I don't see that a lot in web series, but it could happen, I guess, if there was like another fund for a similar thing.
I know recently Talent to Watch had their they do web series and first time features as well.
Yeah, the Telefilm has the Talent to Watch fund. That's something to look at. I think you need a letter from a certain, there's like a list of organizations, and you need to get a letter from them first, and then you can submit to that. But yeah, if anybody wants to talk about the Telefilm Talent to Watch program, that you just contact me, and I can contact you with somebody on the feature film side. So that's not a CMF program, that's Telefilm, and I really don't know tons about it because I don't work on the feature film side. So. But they do allow things other than feature films in that program, so I think, but don't quote me on that. Anyway. So
I think we'll try to do an online session with them as well on feature films. But
have you spoken to anybody in the Vancouver office on the feature film side that might be able to do that, like Lauren Davis or Steve Bates?
Yes, I think the representative for Telefilms just changed, so, and she pretty much had her hands full since the pandemic. So I think we'll eventually get to that, since we'll go on virtual now, so we can do it throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, because they do these sessions as well, like CMF and Telefilm both go to various festivals and conferences and do these panels. So if you need help finding somebody in the feature film department in Vancouver, just let me know.
Yeah, no, that'd be wonderful. I think that's it for us. We do have a small a short film, about 3 minutes, that we would like to play. And if you guys have time, we'd love for you to watch it. I just want to say thank you, Shelley, for giving your time. I know it was last minute since Jill, didn't have a chance because her schedule didn't work out. So I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to. I love doing these things. So
yeah.
Anytime.
Wonderful. That's it. Again, I want to thank Canada Media Fund for putting this together for us, and Shyam. And we will do a small 3-minute video. If you guys could stay back and watch it quickly, would be amazing. It's from one of our sponsors from Toronto. And that's it. That's a wrap for us. Thank you. I think we're having some volume issues. It's not a silent film, that's for sure. I think Shyam wants to be unmuted. I think the volume's not working, so we'll just leave it. Okay. Okay, I guess our volume is not working. We're having some technical stuff. Mannu has a question. Maybe we can take that and then we'll wrap up things. Can you unmute Mannu Chopra? And then we'll wrap it up. There.
Yeah. Thank you. Very informative indeed. I'd just like to know if, you're talking about experience, and if you're venturing into, like, say, the web series space for the first time, does other experience count? Like, for instance, I have 2 movie writing credits and a movie production credit, associate producer credit. So does that count as experience? Because
yes, absolutely. Yeah. So like when we're looking at the team, we're like, they don't necessarily have to have produced a web series before if they've had experience producing television series or something. Or
Canadian TV experience, yeah. So it's just features. So.
Yeah, So I mean, but that shows that you have writing credits and you have writing experience. So if you're the writer on the team, then that would you'd still be counted as having experience since you have written features before. They look at the team as a whole, though. So I mean, if you've never produced a web series before, you might consider getting somebody to help you who has. So.
Okay, thank you kindly. That's nice.
No problem.
Okay, so our videos are playing, so we will leave it. And Shelley, thank you again, and we'll see you soon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks,
have a great
everybody.
long weekend, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, bye. Bye.